used to working in teams, but we are, but we're good. We're back where we need to be, Lisa. Thank you.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. Okay, so we've got, I think, 22 responses there. So we've got a couple more questions. So if everyone's okay for us to move forward with that, I know some of you may be still connecting to the code. So roughly 2/3 of the 22 of you that responded have contributed to writing research papers, but a significant number of you haven't. So how many? So obviously some of you haven't, so that will be 0, but how many of those of you that have contributed to writing research papers, just to give us an idea of your experience really of publishing, how many peer-reviewed research papers have your name on as an author? Okay. Okay, we've got a variation here. Okay. So in the interest of time, I think we'll move to the final question we have in this series. You can see, obviously, a third of you haven't, and then within those that have, some of you have quite a lot of experience of more than 5 papers, and also about a third of you 1 or 2 papers. So thank you for that. And then finally, this is an open response question, I think, Sarah, isn't it? Do you see any barriers or challenges to your writing and publishing research papers? So there's 2 sort of parts of the question there, writing and publishing the papers. I think it's an open question, so you can respond on there anonymously.
Yes, it is.
So what are the barriers? And then I think we'll move on to the next part, which is considering what types of papers we can publish. Yeah, time. Definitely. Feel free as well. I mean, I know we're monitoring the chat. Sarah's monitoring the chat, but also if anyone wants to turn their microphone on and answer them, please do feel free. So time, workload. We can certainly relate to these ourselves. Research fee, that's an important point, which is certainly a barrier. Collaboration across time zones. How to explore correct papers and to write the research. Writing partners and groups, that's a good point as well. So, writing partners. Workshops for writing could be really effective. And I think if I can scroll down here, novelty, language, literature review, language is important. Okay, there's some really important points there. Access to resources, which I hadn't thought about as much, and I suppose that depends. Theoretical framework, analysing methods, corpus. Okay, thank you for that. Some important points there, isn't there? And some of those barriers aren't as applicable to us as well. So it's important for us to think about that as we move forward with this workshop as well. I don't know if you want to say anything there, Sarah, but
I
okay.
think it's one of the things I would just say is it
Mm.
is heartwarming to connect with colleagues so far away and realize that we have the shared barriers and challenges actually, no matter what our country, where we are working or our disciplines, we have similar challenges. And for me, I find that a great comfort because at least then I know that it's not just me in that situation.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. Well, thank you for that. So we're now going to move on to the next part of the workshop, which is what type of research paper can you publish? Okay, so again, it's a question here. So just think about, obviously, many of you have written or authored, been an author on research papers. So what types of papers have those been? So if we could just maybe jot down what types of papers, and then we'll have a discussion on the next slide on that.
I think many of you would dislike this. They are books. Now I'll give you 2 minutes to talk to a partner what you like or what you dislike, and also why. The time starts now. Let's take everyone.
Is that a microphone? Or it sounded
It
like
was.
a recording.
It did. Don't worry, I'll keep an eye on the sound levels, so that's fine.
Excellent. Any more? Ethnography, case studies. So types of research papers. So think about journals. You've mentioned review papers, systematic reviews, literature reviews, meta-analysis. Experimental research. Okay. Scientific conference. Yeah, good point. Excellent. There's a real good range there. I think we'll look at the next slide now. So there's some that are specifically themed papers. So if we go on to the next slide. So in terms of types of research paper, you've mentioned many of these just now. So on this table here, at the top too, you can see original article or case report. A number of you mentioned case reports. And these are obviously primary sources. So this is where it could be a work of literature, a diary, a case study, as you said, a personal observation, some survey responses. Original scholarly research could be wet-based research in a laboratory. It's meaning that the author or authors conduct themselves, conduct research that has not yet been critiqued by anybody. So it's completely first time it's been published. So it's primary research. So it's the first time you've submitted it for critique, peer review, interpretation, analysis by a second, third party, by peer review. So that the two pieces there are original article, a primary piece of literature, or a case report, for example. And you mentioned a number of secondary sources of paper as well. So you mentioned review article, systematic review, meta-analyses. You didn't mention an editorial, for example. You could write an editorial, a book review, a letter to an editor, these sorts of things. These are all secondary source types of papers where you summarize, interpret, and critique and analyze primary literature. So you're doing maybe a review, a literature review, for example. So you're researching things that other people have already laid claim to for the first time. So it's one step away from the original or primary topic. Another way to publish as well, in certainly if you're undertaking something like a PhD or an MSc by research or an MPhil, many higher education institutes publish the thesis. We certainly do at the University of Hertfordshire, and I've put a link there to our archive where our theses are published. So you are publishing your research at PhD or MSc level, and I'm not sure if your institution does that. And you may be aware, I don't know if it does, I don't know if anyone can say at this point whether you know whether your institute does, but finishing something like a PhD on MSc, your thesis will be published unless there's a specific reason to embargo part of that research or the whole thesis if there is a collaborative contract in place, for example. For example, if it's with a pharmaceutical company, for example, where there's IP associated with that research, so there needs to be a delay in publishing it. And secondary sources, so many of you mentioned secondary sources like literature reviews and reviews, and these are an excellent way to publish and get a paper authored and peer reviewed very early on, say, for example, in your studies, like an MSc by research or a PhD. And I've just put 3 examples here of review articles that have been published by 3 of my students while they were undertaking their PhD. So it's an ideal opportunity to start to author and write up your literature review, for example. And every student doing research at postgraduate level, of course, needs to do an in-depth literature review. So it's a really good way to publish that early on, as demonstrated here. Okay, I'll move on. So I don't know if there are any questions on that. Hopefully that's given the breadth, but now I want you to think about why. Seems a simple question, but why write? Why spend the time? You know, we have a lot of barriers, as you've already highlighted here. So why do we do it in the first place? Why are we publishing our research in terms of research, these sorts of research papers?
We do have quite a lot of colleagues on the webinar who aren't using the Menti. Feel free to add your ideas into the chat. One of us can certainly add them into the Menti or contribute them back to the room as well. So if you think that that would be a better way for you to contribute, please do feel free to do so.
Okay. Share findings. One of my professor's duty at the university to meet KPIs. Get motivated. Okay. So I think here you've covered. So we're going to move on to next slide in a minute. I just want to give you kind of a bit more thought, maybe another half a minute, to gather your responses. And as Sarah said, do feel free to add to the chat. I can't actually view the chat, but Sarah's viewing the chat. I can see that there is some response on there, I think. Oh yeah, I can view the chat now. But yeah, you've certainly covered the side of communication. Some of you have touched on expectation. You know, it's some of you, one of you is aware it's your professor's duty. It's important for your own esteem, for your independent career. And of course, it's important to share and communicate. And here you mentioned about to help my students publish. Absolutely. So you're mentoring students and you're, of course, supervising and mentoring the future researchers. So absolutely at the start of their career, early career researchers to help improve writing skills. And importantly here to support teaching and learning. Absolutely. I mean, we're a higher education institutes where all of what we're teaching is research informed, evidence based. So our students absolutely need to be aware that what they're listening to and what they're learning is often something that no one else has discovered, or it might be primary research or secondary research, absolutely critical that we're all research-informed educators. Okay, so you've touched on many of the main aspects, but I've got a slide to sort of break that down a little bit on the next one, so I'm going to move on. So why publishing research papers is important. So you've touched on that, to communicate, of course, absolutely. I mean, why, why are you doing this research in the first place? This novel research, this primary research often that nobody else has done unless others learn about it. So we have to communicate, we have to share that. Otherwise, there's no point, is there, if we're not communicating that? And of course, that could be to the research community, commercial, public communities with an interest in this area. And of course, one of you mentioned about adding to the field. You're contributing to the field, you're moving your field of research forward, and you're communicating that. And a couple of you mentioned, and we're very aware, there is an expectation of your professor, but often it may be an expectation for you or your PhD student or your postdoctoral student or your fellow of your employment in the academic and research institute. Publishing may be a key milestone or deliverable of your funded position. It may determine whether you get more funding, whether you continue your position at that institute. So obviously a very important reason. Some of you touched on different aspects of the next one here, which is it's the impact. Of course, communication is key, but it's the impact that gives you if you share that information. And it could be the information for your academic institute itself, the impact for your collaboration, your partnership, impact for your local research group to sustain that critical mass, to keep people, within that, extend that employment, extend that funding, or of course, impact for yourself as an individual. So to keep your funding, to keep your position, if you wish to, or to lead to another position. It gives you that impetus to move somewhere else. Now, so under the impact, I've got a couple of points here. So in the UK, for example, all higher education institutes undergo what's called a Research Excellence Framework Assessment, or a REF assessment, approximately every 6 to 7 years, where we are made accountable for the public investment, the QR funding that we get in research, and produce evidence of the benefits of this investment. So how have we used this public money? So if you are an author, so if I'm an author or Sarah is an author at University of Hertfordshire on a publication, that's what we call high ranking, or 3-star or 4-star, we call them, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. Then you get that paper gets entered into that REF assessment. So it's only the university have control in terms of what we submit to the assessment, and then of course it gets reviewed by a panel. So it's very, very important, this REF assessment, because that determines what further funding we'll get, and I'll come on to that. Of course, the lasting impact, if we communicate and publish, that's going to be out there now, and it's going to have lasting impact. Hopefully, it could be social impact, it could be education. A few of you mentioned education papers, healthcare, could be impact on policy, it could be economic impact, it could be a new technology or new device, it could impact industry, or it could be ethical, of course, ethical reasons. If we don't share and publish, others won't know we've done it and may repeat what we've done, which could have ethical implications, particularly if it's using, for example, things like animal research, for example, biological research. As I've said, and as some of you have touched on already, it determines the future funding expectation for the higher education institute. So it's an expectation of the professor or the postdoc for your next job. And it also determines the ranking of the higher education institute in the UK higher education league tables, things like the Times Higher Education World Tables. And of course, this is going to impact our staff and student recruitment nationally and internationally, which is really important. And the final reason, of course, to publish, and many of you touched on that, is for your own esteem, your own profile as a contributor in your field. You're adding to the field, you're authoring that, you're being recognised for that, which obviously leads to impact, but particularly early on in your career when you're establishing your own independence. And it's an opportunity to have your research scrutinised and peer reviewed before your PhD, for example, MSc. And it means that you can potentially get submitted into this REF assessment and be known as significantly responsible for research. And if you are, you get research dedicated time. And we've already mentioned how time is important in writing research papers. And having your research read and cited leads to opportunities like funding, networking, new jobs, invitation to act as peer reviewers or expert review panels on editorials, etc. So loads of reasons, many of which you've touched on already. So we all know why we're here and why it's important to us. I'm just looking at the time. So let's go. I just don't want to get, yeah, I'm okay. Okay for the minute, yeah. So just briefly, I've mentioned the Research Excellence Framework, and we wanted to have a small discussion session on this from your perspective. So in the UK, we have this REF assessment, and I've put a link up here to the next round, which is in 2029. There's information coming about that already, but I've just put up a summary here of how we are assessed and how papers are absolutely critical to that assessment. So back in 2021, and the assessment period for that was 2014 to 2020. And during that time, the primary original research papers that we published and submitted to that assessment formed 60% of how we were graded for that assessment as an institute, and all institutes were graded on that. So you can see how important research publications are and dissemination of that high impact papers. And the REF outcomes are really, really important for ranking and everything else, but also it allows the allocation of around £2 billion per year of public funding for universities' research. So it fuels further research. So it's absolutely critical for us. It's an expert review panel. It's carried out by sub-panels focused on subject-based units of assessment, and it's guided under overarching main panels of advisory panels. Now, on the right of this slide here, it's just summarising in terms of what we call 1-star through to 4-star. And these are how research papers are actually graded for quality. And you can see a 4-star paper at the top there is the highest. It's world leading for originality, significance, and rigour. These are the three things. So panels will review these papers and really look at the paper for this, for impact, significance, originality, and rigour. If it's internationally excellent, it will be a 3-star, and then you've got 1-star and 2-star papers which don't get submitted. You don't want your papers that you're submitted coming out as 1 or 2-star because they don't bring any money in. So they need to be 3- and 4-star papers that bring in that funding money. Will contribute to the REF score. Now, I've got one more on this before I get you to think about how how are your papers assessed? How is it assessed in Vietnam, for example, in terms of your higher education institute? So things like originality, of course, I mean, it's kind of sounds obvious. We've mentioned about primary research papers, first time it's been published. So something like this is going to be something that is novel. It's never been discovered before. It could be a new protein for a disease. It could be a new method, a new technology, a new application. It's original, and that needs to stand out on your paper. In terms of significance, I've already mentioned it could be nationally significant, internationally significant, world-leading significance. So, it might be translatable to a human disease, for example, applicable to a clinical community, a research community, society, economy, etc. It could inform new policy, for example. So that has big significance. And rigour is, of course, how, was it well designed? Was the experiment well designed? Was it unbiased? Was it collected independently to support the conclusions? Things with poor rigor would be missing data, poor design, conclusions are unsupported, lack of statistical power, things like that. And usually when papers are ranked, the originality and significance tend to trump the rigor. However, if a highly original and significant piece of research is scientifically flawed, so it has poor rigor, like it's under statistically powered, for example, then this will undermine the score. So this really breaks down how papers are scored, and in terms of our assessment. So now we've got a short bit for a discussion, so which we wanted to, Kim, Sarah, and I wanted to kind of run. In terms, I've sort of spoken about from a ref assessment, process which happens every 7 years in the UK. What happens? How in Vietnam? How are higher education institutes assessed for research excellence? First of all, are you aware how this happens? I'm sure many of you are. And then, how are your research publications assessed nationally? So, is the weighting on the number of citations you get from it, the impact rating, is it via an independent panel review? And how much impact do research publications have on your rankings, for example? So, and I've put some links here to what I could find on the research excellence in Vietnam, the REV framework, for example, which presumably is important.
It would be really great to hear from some of the colleagues who are online, anyone who felt confident enough to use that reaction button, maybe to raise a hand, and we could come to somebody who'd be happy to share some thoughts about their experiences. We were very fortunate enough earlier on to have some people say that they've done quite a lot of publishing of papers. So it would be really pleasing to hear a little reflection on one of these points. Doesn't have to be all of them, but how you feel that research publications are assessed for their quality in Vietnam. It would be great to hear from one or two people. I'm just going to check that I can see the participant information so that we can notice if people are raising a hand. But yeah, we would really welcome that. If you are not confident to talk, but you have a contribution that you'd like to make, please do feel free to pop it into the chat, and we'll pick that up in our conversations, perhaps, as we move along. So, no, I can't see any hands at the moment, Lisa.
Can I just add, Sarah?
I was going to say, Kim, do you want to come in? Yeah, please do.
Can I just say in Vietnamese, nếu bạn nào mà muốn nói tiếng Việt thì cái trên cái Zoom này nó cũng có cái tự động phiên dịch sang tiếng Anh. Các bạn cứ tự nhiên xung phong và bàn luận về cái vấn đề này một chút để cho nó có không khí, và sẽ có cái chế độ tự động chuyển sang tiếng Anh cho Sarah và Lisa có thể hiểu được. Hoặc nếu cần thì mình phiên dịch lại cho hai người đó.
Thanks, Kim. That's absolutely super. We're very aware that each nation has its very own ways of managing this for their higher education and their research sectors, and so some of you may have be publishing on a global stage, and so are having to understand how different publications, rankings and weightings work across an international publishing scene, but also aware that some of you have done very little or no publishing at the moment and are getting started there. And I know, Lisa, I would reflect on the fact that trying to work out about rankings and ratings from someone who started their academic career in a lab sciences type based course, but then took a very sharp turn into the world of education and writing about education, completely different processes for assessing quality of publications and a real learning experience for me in seeing the difference between different types of publications and indeed what would be considered research excellence. I certainly remember the first time I came across and worked with a colleague who was doing a PhD through autoethnography. So an entire PhD based on a really deep philosophical examination of oneself. And it blew my mind as someone who'd come from quantitative sciences that this was research. It absolutely opened my mind to the different ways in which we would be working.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not seeing anything in the chat or a hand up, and I wonder if that is our reading when we were looking. Lisa, you picked up that you've put a note in about the Research Excellence in Vietnam framework, which was a British Council project exploring the idea of having a framework for research excellence in Vietnam. And so perhaps we're still at early days for that to see whether that's something that colleagues would like to explore even further. But hopefully the stories that we've been sharing about the way in which it works here in the UK might enable some really good discussion locally in debates around setting up frameworks.
Yeah.
Mình không biết là ở Việt Nam thì ở Việt Nam mình thì là nếu như các bạn viết một đề tài nghiên cứu thì ai sẽ là người đánh giá đây là một cái nghiên cứu tuyệt vời, đây là một cái nghiên cứu có ảnh hưởng lớn và hoặc là đây là một nghiên cứu mà không có giá trị thì ai sẽ là người đánh giá những cái nghiên cứu và những cái bài viết của các bạn. Các bạn có thể viết bằng tiếng Việt hoặc tiếng Anh vào chat cũng được, mình sẽ dịch lại cho Sarah và Lisa nghe.
Because I think it's really important as well because I think in the points where we talked about barriers and a couple mentioned about the research fee, because some obviously journals charge a fee, open access fee, and higher education institutes have subscription to different journals. So sometimes you don't have to pay that fee. So when you're looking into that, you obviously need to choose your journal. And so understanding kind of this side of things, like how your institute is going to be assessed for those publications that come out from your institute. There must be some understanding of that from the audience here. If some of you have published, so it's like, how did you go about choosing your journal to do that? I mean, here on the slide, I've got the Times Higher Education World University Ranking. So obviously all institutes are ranked within this scale. And here, research quality contributes 30% there on that ranking. So it's significant. We all know it's significant. We all know it's important for lots of reasons, but it is also important for the institute to be delivering strong research outputs. And here it's got citations 15, influence, so that would be kind of significance, like I mentioned, would be 5, strength presumably is like quality, and then excellence 5. So I'm not sure, you'd have to look into the criteria there, but you can see, I mean, we'll come back a little bit
Lisa to respond in the chat.
Okay.
So yeah, so it is similar response where it's kind of locally for each institution there is leaders in the research department or the supervisors who will be the person who assess the research quality for individuals that submitted the research. So it looks like so it's something depend on each institution, isn't it? So it's not no mentioning about the national framework or anything. Yeah.
Okay.
Can I just ask another question in Vietnamese?
Yes. Yeah.
Theo các bạn thì ví dụ như các bạn mà có cái nghiên cứu, mình có những cái cuộc hội thảo hay là những cái về chuyên ngành chuyên nghề chẳng hạn, thì những cái cuộc hội thảo đó thì sẽ có cái phần đánh giá cho các cái nghiên cứu này không? Hay mình chỉ trình bày trong cái hội thảo đó nhưng cái sự ảnh hưởng hay cái sự tuyệt vời của cái nghiên cứu của mình không được đánh giá một cách đúng mức.
I think one of my observations, having looked at those questions, is the importance of working with your superiors in your research. So if you are a research student, working with the experience and the opinion of your laboratory team or your research team, your supervisors. And I can see, thanks to the power of Google Translate, looking there about the importance of having the content of research papers approved locally and making sure that they go out. And that can be a really important part of ensuring that an institution is not brought into disrepute or gets a bad reputation. But we equally here in the UK have a new piece of legislation actually this summer around freedom of speech, which means that an academic should not feel controlled about what they are researching and publishing in. Of course, they have to be research informed and they have to be evidence-based. They can't make up data, but that perhaps we have a little less sense here of our university approving an article before it goes off to be published than you might find in your experience in Vietnam. I think just different ways of doing things. And then I think if I can trust, and it's a big if I can trust the Google Translate of Quang Pham, that last comment that you've made there, I think Google tells me that you say it is an individual's inner strength that determines the quality of the paper. And I really like the fact that you talk about how much of oneself you put into your writing. I think that is really important. But I would also, and I'm sure Lisa would back me up here, writing for research papers is a skill the same way as painting or playing the piano or learning to play a sport. It is something that needs practice, lots of practice and lots of feedback from other people. So whilst you have your own understandings about what you're doing, making sure that you're working with other people, getting feedback from good research groups or indeed your supervisor is a really important part of developing in that process, isn't it, Lisa?
Yeah, definitely. And I think earlier there was a barrier was about writing partners. I said, and so if it is at a local level, and it often is, and you know how it works in terms of writing, are you collaborating within your lab group or your local research group, or is it across school? Is it across institutes? And it's coordinated by a leader, as it sounds like, you know, a professor maybe. So having support internally and local peer review is really, really important and really, really effective. And we find in some areas at the university that is really well coordinated, and in other areas there doesn't seem as much support for that locally. But yeah, as Sarah said, we do tend to be, you know, you're kind of in your field, expertise in your field, and you do have quite a lot of freedom potentially to choose where you publish that. You make that choice rather than the institute makes that choice. But it is also constrained by publication fees often. And we have a process where we can apply for funding internally to get open access fees, for example. But we have to justify why we're not going for a journal that we automatically don't pay fees for because we've already got a subscription with. So yeah, I think inevitably things are done locally as well. But we'll come back to this a little bit when we talk about finding the right journal. So we're going to move on now to the kind of writing aspect of the paper. So thank you for that discussion, and we can certainly come back to that. So I was going to get next sort of 20 minutes or so, I was going to talk through steps of writing a research paper, and then we'll come on to talking more about, you know, how we select the journal, etc. So obviously, if you're ready to write your research paper, and significant number of people here haven't authored one, but you may be at a point where you're about to, or you want to, or you need the time to, but you've got the research together. So the first question obviously is, are you confident you're ready to publish? Are you at the right point? Have you got your research together? I'm going to talk through the IMRAD stages, so the introduction, methods, results and discussion, conclusion, title and abstract. Okay. So are you confident then? So obviously following an extensive literature review, you will know what the investigators in your field and those in other fields have published about your topic or similar topics. You know what you want to study, why you want to study it, and how your results contribute to the current pool of knowledge on the subject. You would know if your findings are original, significant, and rigorous. And we are talking about primary literature here, not a review article. Know your paper advances a particular line of research. It does not need to answer, obviously, every remaining question about the topic, but map out your paper first to stay focused on that line of research. And also, many of you may have already published some of this work maybe at a conference. A couple of you mentioned conference proceedings, as a way to publish, of course, as a poster or a communication. And that could be an international, national, or a local conference within your institute. Early constructive criticism, whether it comes locally or internationally or nationally, is obviously so important to help you in your writing. So a checklist then. We know that competition is high, rejection rates are high, so we need backup journals as well. So you need to be confident when you start, you set about writing your paper up now, that hopefully you tick these boxes, you're ready, your research is relevant, it's original, significant and rigorous. You've obtained all the necessary ethical approvals, hopefully, because you've done the research, you've got that well in place well before you've done the research, of course. You followed your Higher Education Institute research guidelines. You've compiled and analysed the data set, whether that's qualitative, quantitative, you've got your data. You've drawn your conclusions. You've done whatever statistical analysis. You've produced and presented the data in whatever format is needed. And you've read all the key publications to put your work in context. So now we come on to this, writing your research paper. So mapping out your paper. So of course, in the middle here, you've got your title, your abstract, and your conclusion. But then you've got your introduction, which I'd write first. Why did you study it in the first place? So what's the rationale? What's the key background literature? Which then leads to your clear hypothesis and your clear research questions and objectives. And then, of course, the methods are, what did you do? Then your results are, what did you find? And then, of course, your discussion is, what does it all mean? How does it change or impact the field? What's the significance of it? And then finally, your conclusion. And I'd always write your abstract and your title. Absolutely key, but I'll come back to that at the end. So I was just going to talk through each of these. So the body of the paper should support your central research message and demonstrate that you've thoughtfully and comprehensively studied that topic. Should be obviously clearly written and logical, easy to follow. And generally, original scholarly research articles, so these primary literature articles, which give you all the impact and the ref ratings and everything else, are organised under these sections with a specific order that helps the readers recognise and follows the author's train of thought. So usually it's this format. There are exceptions to this, of course, so I've sort of got a few slides following this format: introduction, materials and methods, results and discussion. So when you're writing your introduction, of course, it should be brief. It shouldn't be too long, too comprehensive. It's not a literature review. So it should be realistic, logical. You want the reader to read the full paper. So you just want to avoid using lots of acronyms unless absolutely necessary. Break up the introduction into paragraphs, into smaller units. Don't have too long blocked paragraphs. Start the introduction with a concise literature review of the exact subject, highlighting the specific problem that needs to be investigated. So here you're just basically highlighting the unmet need, the gaps, why you need to do this research. Yeah, needs to be really clear. And then following this sort of focused literature review, it will lead to your objectives, the purpose objective of your research. So at the end of the introduction, of course, you lay out the specific rationale and the specific objectives. Always use past tense, unless, of course, you're stating accepted facts like heart disease is the leading cause of this or whatever prevalence. Use past tense. It's a slightly busier slide, but I put a few useful links on here. So in terms of methods, methodology in a primary paper, avoid explaining the scientific procedures and protocols you've used. You don't need to explain how the methods work. I've put examples like Western blotting, for example, these specific detail methods. You don't need to explain how they work. You just need to state very clearly that you've used these techniques. Unless, of course, the paper is developing that technique, of course, the background, you know, it's a new technology development paper. Use third person passive voice. So, for example, RNA was extracted from the cells, not we did this, we did that. It needs to be very detailed, the methods. So someone reading the methods in the paper needs to be able to repeat it in their laboratory. So you need to have details of the companies where you purchase the reagents, materials, the software you've used, the versions of software you've used for the experiments. If you've had donations from companies, etc., to provide you with the tools that you've needed, you need to acknowledge those. You need to cite all ethical approvals, all statistical methods you've used, graphing, statistical packages and versions used. So it can be replicated very easily. Now, in a methodology, if there's quite a number of steps, a flow chart or a figure can be really useful to illustrate a complex experimental design. On the next slide, I illustrate this, how I've used this in a number of papers. And then the next one, I haven't used this tool, Napkin, but I've read about this tool and a student has used this tool. It's a free AI tool that can turn text into visuals. So it can create visuals for you or even help you see how you could schematically lay something out. It generates infographics, diagrams, flowcharts to help you convey scientific concepts through clear visuals. Text to diagram capability. The other version that I have used is BioRender. I don't know, has anyone used BioRender? We have a license, we've paid for a license for a number of our students to use this. A number of our PhD students are really widely using this now. It's really good for creating visuals for presentations as well, particularly in biology where you're kind of mapping out complex pathways or schematics. It's a really good tool. Another, I don't know if any of you have looked at Jove, the journal Jove. This is a video journal. Sometimes they approach you if you've published a paper on a new methodology to see if you want to publish a video format of that method. So it's really good for teaching as well because it's video based. We don't have a subscription for it at the university. There are a lot of free videos online as well, so you can have a look at the Jove link. So it is a useful, I would say, definitely if you're teaching a new technique. Or if you've developed a new methodology, it's a good way to publish that as a video format. So here I've just shown, I mean, this on the right here, this would be a systematic review approach where you've done, you'd always have a Prisma kind of flow chart there in your methodology of how you've actually gone about systematically reviewing the literature, for example. So it's a really good example of how you'd use a flow chart there. On the left here, I've got these are from two of my publications, where it's quite a complex experimental design treatment approach. So we've obviously described it in the methods, but we've also included a schematic timeline flow to really make it clear. So someone isn't referring back to text all of the time. So flow charts work really well in methods. So obviously the results should include the findings of your study and only the findings of your study. I'm always telling my students that when they might put in other data. Of course, you are presenting and interpreting just your findings in the results. They're original findings. You can present them as text, tables, figures, graphs, photographs, whatever format is right for that data or qualitative. Some journals, of course, will stipulate the number of figures and tables and format that you need to present in. A contextual analysis of this data, explaining its meaning in sentence form, is needed. And that tends to need to flow through. So you might present a figure and then a short narrative interpreting that figure underneath, flowing through the results section. It should be rigorous. It should be very clear, critical description, demonstrating the clear findings. You're reporting on the data collection. If it's survey-based, you need to report on recruitment, participants, the demographics, and of course you are describing and interpreting the findings and how they align to the research question. Sometimes I find subheading my results aligned to the research aims is really, really helpful. It helps you flow your results. And again, in the discussion, I do the same. So everything is always going back to your research question. And of course, you may be presenting here secondary findings, secondary outcomes, or subgroup analysis, so more detailed analysis. And sometimes this may be presented in an appendices or a supplementary bit of information to the paper. So it's additional but not key findings. Describe the key findings. You know, there may be a lot of data in a particular figure. You may have put multiple panels in. You don't need to describe every single thing. You need to focus on the key findings. Don't discuss the findings. That's for the discussion. Just explain what you found, from the results. Unless, of course, some journals request you to structure your paper as results and discussion together. Some papers do, some journals do ask for that. Number your figures and tables or whatever format you're presenting in according to the journal guidelines and cite them in the text. So refer to the figures and tables within the narrative and follow the journal specifications when formatting your figures and tables. And organize it logically. Like I said, if you do subheadings for the research question, it really focuses everything back to that. Now, when you are presenting, I've got on this slide here a panel, C and D, from a figure in a paper I've published. And you can see there's quite a long, in-depth legend, figure legend, obviously underneath the figure here with the title. And then it clearly explains what's in panel C and D here in depth. Tells you what the data is, the statistical test that's been used, the number of per group, what the treatments were, and the statistical comparison. So any symbols that you're adding all need to be explained in detail in the legend. The figures and tables have to speak for themselves. When you're reading a paper, as you know, you might be looking at the data and you need to be able to look straight at the data and the legend, and everything needs to be clear. You shouldn't have to go to the text or the methods to figure out what's going on in your figure or your table. Don't overload them with data. Make sure the axes descriptions are clear and not too small. Everything can be read. Remember, when you publish this work, it's going to be reproduced in lots of different formats. So the resolution needs to be really key. And journals will come back to you anyway, particularly if it's a photograph or something, if it's not the right quality, and ask for that because it's being reproduced. And obviously, if you haven't got the resolution, you won't be able to read what's on it. It needs to be reproducible in monochrome. And like I said, should be stand alone. Finally, the discussion. Always remember the primary message of your paper. So subheadings to, excuse me, I'll move this. Subheadings to back to the research questions is really good to help structure your discussion. Discuss why you obtained the observed results. Don't just restate the results, because that's in the results. You do need to pull out the key findings in your discussion and then explain why you think you observed those results and why they are important. What is their significance? How do they advance the field? Someone mentioned at the beginning how we're adding to the field. The discussion needs to really clearly state how you're adding to the field, why this is novel. You need to definitely get across that this is the first time this has been reported. If your research findings are what we call incremental or suggestive or supported rather than really decisive, you need to discuss that. You need to be really honest and transparent and say, don't overstate the importance of what you've found. It might be preliminary findings, but you want to publish it quickly. So it might not be a 4-star paper or a 3-star paper. It might only be a 1-star, 2-star paper, but you want to get that out quickly. So you need to really discuss that and be honest and say, well, okay, this is suggestive or supportive, and discuss why that is. If there are multiple possible explanations, be sure to address all the possible reasons. You can still favour one explanation, but mention alternative explanations as well. And explain why your results might falsify current theories if this is the case. So you're explaining some data that completely goes against what you've found. If you don't discuss these, the peer reviewers will certainly make it clear that they want you to do that. So it's kind of it's like preparing for an interview. It's trying to predict all the questions that a peer reviewer might be asking you. So unpick your discussion. Discuss the next steps, additional tests that you maybe didn't do, but gaps in your work, experiments that need to be performed. There's always more research to be done, as we know, and always note any current limitations, maybe in your study design or the findings, for example. And make sure it's concise and informative. It's easy to get carried away discussing the meaning of your findings. Stay focused on the key messages. The conclusion, so not all journals ask for a conclusion. So I would always, if they don't want a separate conclusion, then I would always put a conclusion at the end of your discussion. Obviously, it brings everything together in a final paragraph, brief, concise, and worth remembering. A conclusion must always start by addressing the main topic of the paper to remind the reader where it all began. And the next step is to bring forward the key results and findings and stress the significance. That's all that's needed in the conclusion. By using the right impactful language, it's possible to point out how relevant your paper is in the community. This tone should be strong enough to inspire other researchers to follow your work in the future. And importantly, this is often the only part of the paper read alongside the abstract by a ref panel assessor, certainly from the workshops that I've been to. They're reading many, many papers. So the abstract, they will look at the rigor, and often they will look at the impact of the conclusion. They may then go back and look at discussion. So the conclusion is really, really key to help score the paper. So you need to capture the impact and significance. And I've just got an example here of how we've done that in a conclusion on one of my papers. I've talked about an innovative approach may lead to clinical outcomes for these new drugs in this condition. So really sort of speculative, but impactful. And finally, the title and the abstract. Now, this is the most important thing that you write on your paper. Why? Because it's often the only section that people will read quickly to decide whether they're going to actually download your paper and potentially cite your paper. So readership, of course, now we have metrics for everything because it's all online. So we can see when we publish our papers, we can see how many reads it gets. We can certainly also see how many citations it gets. So we want people to download the paper. We want people to read the paper. So we need to have a very strong abstract. This is the only bit that is free. to open access on PubMed or whatever search engine you're using. So it needs to be absolutely key to entice someone to download that paper. It's also the section that's used for indexing, of course, in databases. So you need to use the right keywords here to ensure that it gets pulled up when people are searching those keywords in your key topic. And I've mentioned already, it's often the section alongside the conclusion that will be read by editors and by ref panel assessors. Sometimes the editors of a journal, when you're submitting, will just ask you to submit the abstract, and then they'll determine if it's suitable for their journal as well. So it's quite good to get early feedback if, for example, it's not suitable. You do the research, you contact the editor. You don't want it sitting in their journal for weeks and weeks, and then they reject it because it's not suitable. So you want early feedback. And the title needs to clearly summarize the theme of the paper, while the abstract should detail the aim and the scope of the research, include the methods used, the problems addressed, and your key findings and significance. That's what needs to go in your abstract. Then once published, the search engines will look for specific keywords, and if these aren't included, then your paper won't be found. Limit the amount of background information in an abstract, ideally just 1 or 2 sentences setting out the problem and the rationale, and the rest should be, your key findings and the significance and conclusion. And you don't need to refer to anything, figures, tables, citations in an abstract. I don't know if any of you have published your papers with a visual abstract, or I'm sure many of you have come across a visual abstract when you've looked up read papers or downloaded papers. It's a visual summary of the main findings of your paper. It could be a concluding figure that is in your discussion or in the results section. So it can be a concluding figure from the paper, or a figure that's specifically designed which summarizes the content of the whole article. So some journals want you to write a narrated abstract and a visual abstract. It's certainly not the norm, but some journals do ask for that. It's something that we do with our students as well. We get them to write an abstract and do a visual. That's a really good exercise for students to visualize what they're trying, their understanding of that paper that you've given them. If they accept, so they don't always make it mandatory, but if they do accept it, it's a good idea to submit one to make your article more visual and noticeable. It's ideal for review articles. Many of you mentioned review articles. Many publishers are now requesting them for original articles as well, and they display them online. And as I mentioned again, Napkin, which I haven't used myself, or BioRender, are really good tools to help you create your visual abstract. And this is just an example. This is a paper published with a PhD student who worked in industry at GSK. And this is the narrated abstract here on the right. And then we summarized it here. This was the particular inhibitor I mentioned on these particular T lymphocyte cells in this particular disease. So a nice visual overlay. And these visual abstracts are really useful as well, even if you've created it for a paper, just to use for your presentations. I mean, you may be presenting this work at a conference as a communication or in a poster, or being invited to give talks on this work that you've published. So they're really, really useful to have, because you do need to create these visuals anyway. Of course, referencing absolutely essential, as we know, in terms of sourcing and evidence-basing the literature in the text, and of course listing at the end, as we all know. Sometimes reference section will be required, or in a footnote, depending on the target journal requirements. I use Mendeley or Zotero. I don't know what you use, Sarah. I don't know what others use. If there's any other bibliographic software that you'd recommend, then I'd be welcome to hear from you as to what you use to store your references.
I'm a Mendeley fan as well. I think, but equally, I would say for those of you, I'm really conscious about the fact that some of you are just starting out. And I think anything that allows you to systematize what you're using and that works for you is good. And I will absolutely confess to taking a very long time to move away from having a spreadsheet with sources in and to use referencing bibliographic software because I was too busy to learn how to use the software. And then I just took some time out one summer and said, actually, I'm going to spend a whole day looking at this, getting to grips with it and working how I used it. But I think the critical thing that I often say to people is store your sources systematically, whatever works for you as you go along. But if you can use bibliographic software, that eases the pain when it comes to publication.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. To see what people are using, but yeah, it's got a plugin, Mendeley or Zotero, so you can embed it into Word. So if you're, obviously writing your paper, drafting your paper, then you can use Mendeley and it embeds it in the format that the journal's requiring. So it does save a lot of time. The other thing is you can read papers in the reference manager. It's free as well. And then you can edit those papers, highlight sections of papers, and it's all saved in there. So it's a really useful thing to do early. But as you say, Sarah, I find this with a lot of these AI tools, which I know are really, really useful. It's just finding the time to really spend on learning how to use them. And when you don't use something regularly, you forget how to use it too. So it's totally understandable. It always comes back to time. So in the interest of time, I don't want to spend yeah, this is kind of obvious. You've got these slides, but I think someone said earlier about research writing partners. Definitely, if you're an author on a paper, you're writing collaboratively with other authors. So set up a Google Drive or a shared drive with co-authors and peers. Get as much feedback as possible before you submit. So whether that's locally, whether that's objective feedback from another research group, we can always improve. We ourselves locally could improve this. We do have we've used some culture funding money at the university to do research writing retreats, I should say, which have been popular for some of our students as well, our postgraduate students as well as our staff as well. So that kind of thing, which sounds like it might be helpful for some of you across areas as well. I've put a link to an article here, Hello Bio, which I follow on LinkedIn. This company, they do loads of excellent educational materials. And so there's a recent article they've written on writing research papers, which I thought might be useful here. So just finally, just to sort of finish really, was to choosing the right journal. Finding the right journal. I think I had a question back. So where is it most likely to be read and cited? That's the key. You want to find the right home, don't you, for your journal? And we could spend some time discussing this, how those that have published chose their journal. Talk to your professor, talk to your PIs, your principal investigators, peers. There are so many journal finding useful links now. So all the different publishers tend to have journal finding links like Elsevier. I've put Jane, which searches PubMed. Springer. I've just put a few examples here where you can put the title of your paper in or the abstract of your paper, and then it will match it to similar papers that have been published in that area and where they've been published. So it kind of helps you create a short list of journals where that sort of work is being read and published. Obviously, some conferences that you present at, and you may have presented some of that research in a poster or a communication, oral communication. They often have a special issue journal for that conference where they invite contributors to publish in. So looking for those. I've published a few papers in conference journals. Look at the turnaround time. Journals will often publish how quickly it takes to turn around a paper. Peer review is the slowest bit of it, finding peer reviewers I've found. But yeah, that's obviously really important, particularly with primary literature where you want to get that publication out quickly. Publication fees is a barrier, definitely, to where you're going to put your work or where you can put your work. Open access fees, manuscript processing or colour figure reproduction fees. Talk to your PI, your professor, your budget holder. Do you have the funding for these publication fees? If you don't ask the question, it might not have been discussed with you. There may be additional funding. Often there is when you apply for funding, you add on extra money for publication or for conferences. And journal format, of course, making sure you are presenting your paper in the correct format to meet the requirements. Otherwise, it might get instantly rejected. So, and just finally, you've published your paper. So quite a few of you have published quite a few papers or 1 or 2 papers. So once it's published, are there any other ways you can promote that paper? How would you go about promoting that publication? Because we don't just stick with the journal these days, and this comes back to impact factor as well and open access. You know, it's not, impact is much wider than just the journal itself now, isn't it? It's getting that impact, getting that communication out there. How else could you promote your published research? Because obviously you want to be tracking things like metrics, like readership. You want people to be reading your work in that journal, so you can look at the journal and see how many are reading it. But how can you promote that even further to a wider audience, not just the immediate scientific community or whatever the community, educational community or whatever, learned community? Share in discipline networks. Okay, yeah, absolutely. So you could share that locally, or of course, you might be members of wider learned societies, discipline societies that might be national or international, where they have wider readership or a high membership number, through newsletters, for example. On X or Blue Sky, absolutely. LinkedIn is an excellent targeted social, I would say social media, but it's professional media platform for sharing papers. Link in that paper to your profile. Really, really good on your signature, your email signature, or on your actual LinkedIn, top papers or whatever people to read. Someone's put on Facebook or present on my uni. Sponsored by the leaders, budget for research and fees for publishing.
Lisa, I'm going to do a bit of a shout out here at this point, in that we have a LinkedIn network for this project, looking at academic leadership for women particularly, and we would love to see people join that group and to be to post about their achievements, so where they are, whether they're winning research bids or working on a research project or getting something published. We would love to see you posting about that, and I'll pop a link to that into the chat so that people can find it.
Excellent. No, perfect example. Okay, I've put a list on the final. I've got 2. This is the penultimate slide. Ways to promote your published research to maximize engagement and impact. So we don't just sit back now and wait for the journal to do its thing. We might accept invitations. We might get more invitations to meetings, conferences, invited talks. Take advantage of the open access funds, so wider reach. Make sure your research profile is up to date. We have a RIS profile here where you would definitely be adding the paper to that, to your LinkedIn profile, maybe to your email signature, if you want people to read that paper, using keywords that your users and beneficiaries might be searching. And I think you've mentioned a number of social media. ResearchGate is another one, learned societies. So link these digital platforms to your email signature research profile. You may have a press office, I'm sure you do, at the university, at your institute, so you can contact that. They can do a press release, or marketing and communications can help you with internal and external engagement and audience, particularly if it's really highly impactful. You know, this is the big thing. You know, what community do you want to get this out to, rather than just the journal you've submitted to, whether it be education, whether it be policy. You know, how can you get this out there to that? Another, I don't know if colleagues are aware of this academic newspaper, The Conversation. I've put The Conversation UK, but it's worldwide. You need to subscribe to it. The Institute has to subscribe to The Conversation. I don't know if you've used it, Sarah. I certainly have, where you work with a journalist, but you basically have control over what is written. So you're linking your research to a very short narrative article that you write with a journalist to really get something out there topically. And sometimes these get picked up by national newspapers. Like, you know, there are many examples of that, and suddenly the readership becomes much wider. And of course, follow your publications, monitor the citation and the H index of your articles. And I think that was it. So summary, your strategy for writing and publishing research papers, plan the time. And I know we haven't really talked about the barriers because time is an issue for all of us, but it's really about having the time. And maybe it's a funded position, maybe it's part of your role, maybe it is an expectation, you know, making sure you have that time factored in so that you have the time to draft with peers, with your group, with your professor to write this publication up and submit. Be strategic, really think about the best journal type of paper. Make the most of your team, peers, internal peer review of writing drafts, maybe a writing retreat approach. If it's, and I've got a couple of additional slides that you can look at, 1-star, 2-star. So it's really important research, 1-star, 2-star. It's not to say don't publish it. You know, it's impactful, it's incremental, it's adding to the field. It might not be massively significant compared to 3-star, 4-star, but could you make this 3-star, 4-star by adding to this piece of work with collaboration, for example, or doing more research, getting more funding for that? Which are the priority publications? There may be a number of publications that you have to write up as part of your research, your role, your studies. Always have a key message, be bold and realistic in the significance, quality, not quantity. And once your research paper is published, have a publication promotion strategy. And that was it. Hopefully, I think we more or less, timing was good. It's always difficult. I think Sarah's had to leave because she's got another session now. Timing is always often difficult, particularly with discussion, but I think we've got a few minutes here for discussion and any questions. There's obviously other aspects I could have touched on, like authorship, how we, you know, line up authorship, except on papers and things like that. But we really wanted to focus on today really publishing research papers. So I hope there's been some useful points in the slides as well as the presentation for you to go away and look at as well. Any questions before we finish the session? Or points you want to add, or that maybe I haven't touched upon? I think I can see the chat now. Can you see anything, Kim?
No, I think not yet.
Okay.
Nếu các bạn có câu hỏi gì hay có muốn trao đổi một vấn đề gì đó thì các bạn cứ tự nhiên, một là cho vào viết vào cái chat, hoặc là có thể phát biểu để cho chia sẻ với các bạn thôi. Và mình sẽ dịch lại cho Lisa nếu mà các bạn nói bằng tiếng Việt.
I think there is a question. Tai Ann has mentioned about the novelty in research. Ask about novelty in research. I think it really depends on what the, I mean, usually that's kind of from your funded research or whatever is supporting you doing that research. But not always, because if it's secondary research, like a review article, then you're using you're pulling together a comprehensive literature review of already published research. So it's not novel, but it may be that there has been no review article for many, many years really pulling together the current literature. So it's really important. It's a really important time to pull that together as a review or systematic review, for example. So, but I think highlighting the novelty in your research, if you're right, if you have, you know, been part of some funded research, or you've secured some funding and you've generated some research, you've got a clear research questions, you know what the gaps are, you know this is the first time this has been found. It's really about making sure that is communicated clearly in your research paper, that this is the first time this has been discovered or addressed. Sometimes, of course, we do research and it is novel at the time, you know, we have the funding to do it, but somebody else publishes on it while you're doing the research or before you've written it up and published it yourself. So it's obviously less impactful then, but nonetheless, it may be that the way you've designed the experiment, there's still novelty within there, but it is really important to pull out the originality, the novelty within your research, not just for a research paper, of course. If you're doing your PhD or a master's or a postdoctoral fellowship, particularly for a PhD, where you're writing your thesis, you still need to pull out the originality in your research, because if you're doing a PhD, there needs to be many aspects of it that are original, as well as significant. And so the novelty in it needs to be really communicated in the thesis as well. I was going to ask, but I think we're over time now, but was whether it's an expectation of a PhD student at HUTECH, for example, whether they need to publish before they submit for their viva. It isn't a requirement here at the University of Hertfordshire, but many of our students publish before and many publish after, but it's not a requirement to have published before. But at some institutes, I know that is the case. So it's important to know that and understand that, of course. So
there is another question here, Lisa.
Oh, okay. Yeah. On the chat?
Yes. So what are the difference
Ooh.
between Scopus, Sky, or WUS?
I don't use Sky or WUS. I use Scopus. I don't know the answer to that. Let me stop sharing my screen. Sorry. That would make it easier, wouldn't it? Is that stop sharing now?
Yeah, it's stopped now.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Sky or WUS, if you can elaborate as to what. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that. Sky or WUS. I presume it's another metrics. Let me just have a quick look.
Yes, the Sky is a social
care. Yeah, Social Care Institute of Excellence. So Scopus is it's not specific to any particular themed or type of research. Scopus will pull together all your peer-reviewed outputs, basically. So I would recommend everybody has a login for an account for Scopus. Certainly, if you then any kind of research activities that you do above publishing, like maybe you get involved in an guest editor in a journal, anything like that, will link your Scopus to that. And if you were going maybe for promotion, for example, those sorts of metrics are usually pulled out from Scopus. So it looks like Sky is a metric for social care specifically. Web of Science. Okay, I don't have a Web of Science account, but again, I think it's similar to Scopus. Across disciplines, yeah. So it's across. So I think Web of Science and Scopus are cross-discipline based platforms. So I think either one of those would be absolutely fine to be using for your metrics. Yeah. Thank you. Question. Any other questions? If not, just thank you all, everyone, for joining today. And thank you, Kim. And also Sarah. Sarah's had to leave. She's teaching now. But yeah, thank you. Any follow-up questions, whatever, happy for you to send me any questions. I think the session's been recorded and you have the slides as well. So, but yeah, any follow-up questions, obviously I'm very happy to take those. So thank you very much, and have a good rest of the day. Thank you. Thank you. That's very kind.
I'm going to end the meeting for O's. Is it okay? Yep.
Thank you, Kim. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just trying to see how many joined us today. That's quite a few, wasn't there?
Yeah, we started at like 100 because it's a shame that it's limited at 100 people attendance.
Oh, really?
Yes,
Really?
I tried to join at the beginning and I couldn't because it was only 100. So, but then some people left and some people managed to get in, and it stayed at 100 for maybe the first half of the session, and then it's down to maybe 90, and then yeah, so stay in 90 for most of them.
Excellent.
So
That's really good. Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
really
it's good.
good.
And it's recorded,
It's
isn't it?
really
So
good. It's really good.
yeah.
It's really good. I think that's obviously this is something that a lot of Vietnamese researchers are interested to find out about how to write and publish internationally, because that's something it's not really well promoted in Vietnam right now. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. And anything sort of collaboratively, I guess, as well, like it was mentioned about partners and stuff, and that's one way that it's really helpful, isn't it? But to do it internationally, etc., and kind of learn that way. But yeah, no, it's
I think especially for those, who want to collaborate internationally, and they know how we work, and that would give them kind of, an idea, how to kind of prepare themselves and, to work together in a collaborative project. Okay.
Absolutely, particularly early career researchers. Yeah, and we have the same kind of approach with our early career researchers. That's the thing. That's and yeah, there's certainly you can always do things better, and having particularly I think something like a peer review process, but again that comes back to time. It's coming back to having dedicated timetable time to have those sessions repeatedly. But we do have obviously the network of Women Plus Professors, but we also have an AWAG network, Academic Women's Action Group network, which has pushed again for, and this is open to everybody, it's not just women, in terms of things like workshops for writing retreats for obvious reasons, but yeah, it's just highlighting and so a lot of those things, and we, as I mentioned, we have used some culture community funding internally to kind of improve these processes. But yeah, it is, and often it's knowing about the opportunities and being able to put the time in, to factor in the time. But I suppose if you have those sessions, then at least people can if they're there, then people can access them if they have the time to do so. So the opportunity's there, isn't it? So, but yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, no, great. And yeah, I look forward to, I think we've got a couple more workshops. So
yes, we do.
On mentorship and a grant writing as well. So I need to, that will be important as well. And I think from us to understand the differences as well, I think, because of course we know how it works in the UK, but in terms
Yes,
of, and what those barriers might be, and some of
might
them are the
be, isn't
same
it?
and some of them are very different. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It-
Okay,
Okay, okay.
great.
So I'm
Great.
gonna
Well, thank you, Kim. Okay.
I'm gonna end the session for all by leaving now, and
Okay.
hope that I can do that, because I think some, we still got
Yeah.
39 people in the room. I'm not sure
Yeah.
whether they are okay. Just
Did
once
you
again.
open the session? I think
I didn't, but
I
I hope that,
joined, but
yeah, but
yeah.
we co-organize, so we can do that. So let me try to see whether I can end the session
Yeah, see if you can do it.
altogether.
I can certainly leave the meeting, but I can't close it for all.